they thought a few years ago that running it in the cloud was going to be a cheaper option. Just taking X, moving it into the cloud and calling it Cloud X is basically a rude awakening for them. For the most part, mid-market, you got P cards and credit cards floating around. It's easy. It's the gift and the curse. It's so easy to turn up a VM on AWS. Guess what? That's the same reason why you've got completely no visibility into what your cost situation is. It's like my daughter, turn up the music, turn up the lights, turn up the the air conditioners to frickin' 62 degrees, right?
Why not?
Why not? Like, she doesn't see that utility bill from Georgia Power.
It's magic money.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's the same thing.
Is this an IT problem? Is this a business problem? Or is this a communication problem? So what's the fix here? Just enough time or pain or external pressure before people say we shouldn't be doing this way anymore?
Mm-hmm.
RapidScale started as a desktop as a service company,
yeah,
right? And then moved into managed IT services, and then has moved farther into public cloud.
Absolutely.
How much of that was opportunity driven? How much of that was customer driven? How much of that was just watching where the landscape was moving and what was going on?
I think a little bit of all of that, right? I think it was opportunity driven. I've been with the company 4 years, so I'm the channel CTO, so I get a chance to spend a lot of time with partners, customers, in all types of industries. So I find my job really interesting because I learn more than I frankly give, right? So anytime you can get yourself in a situation where you are like learning from the people that are in that room, like, man, this is, and I get paid to do this. This is not bad, right? So if you look at kind of historically, you're absolutely right. We're a DaaS company, started in 2008, business industry, COVID, has changed the game from an IT services perspective in so many different ways. And so up until about 2.5 years ago, we'd get into a conversation on cloud migrations, optimization, security. Hey, we need to take some of your on-prem workloads and shift them into a kind of a managed services, sort of managed cloud environment. And everybody really bought into that story, or at least the people we were talking to bought into that story. But inevitably, as we went up market, organizations were like, well, that's great, but what are you doing for me in the public cloud? And I know you spend a lot of time with your customers in the world of public cloud. So those guys are now thinking through, okay, I need to shift my approach, shift my strategy into potentially some of these hyperscalers. I don't have internal teams and resources to be able to help address some of the historical core IT stuff that I used to do. So I need an expert. And so what we did, a lot of folks who may be watching this may remember this, but RapidScale bought a company called LogicWorks. And so what LogicWorks added to the portfolio is not only our core managed services, on Broadcom VMware platform, data centers all over the globe, but along with that added a whole slew of public cloud practices. So over the last couple of years, we've developed that, built that even more. So AWS, obviously, a lot of history, a lot of legacy, a lot of lineage there. Azure, we spent a lot of time, thinking through migrations and optimization on Azure, and then obviously we have a GCP practice as well. So your question is, was that market driven? Yeah. Was it customer demand and question driven? Absolutely. And then we also saw that, you can't change, I always say this, you cannot change inertia, right? CIOs are going to make CIO decisions. I had a dinner last night with about 15 CIOs in a really interesting restaurant called the Charles. Had a great time, but learned a lot. They're like, look, we all have a FinOps practice. We all have workloads in the public cloud. Could we be more optimized? Absolutely. But, we are sort of, we're a financial services company. We're not a tech company. So that's where people like RapidScale and others sort of come in and bring value.
Okay, so DaaS is, everything became branded as a service, right?
Yeah.
So we ended up with desktop as a service.
Yeah.
And before that, you call it like remote desktop, or you called it VDI, or you call it, there's all these different terminologies. But really, even in that world, DaaS is not a new concept.
No.
And client server, goes back to the, beginnings of microcomputers, IBMs and terminals. And I can remember Microsoft releasing Windows NT Terminal Server 1.0 in the late 90s. Citrix back then doing it. Why was why has DaaS never become the default inside of the enterprise?
I think there's a misconception. And by the way, I remember those NT terminal services days where I used to, early in my IT days, I used to find that fascinating. Oh my God, I can remote into some other machine, and I'm sitting at home, and I can manage that machine, and I can basically replicate that experience as I would. It was great, right? So I do remember that. Why has it not taken place? I think it depends on the enterprise. Like what we see, and let me refute me or agree or disagree with me, is organizations where manufacturing firms, call centers, healthcare organizations, where you've got a shift worker. You've got people coming in at 9 o'clock. You're basically utilizing a machine, a resource, to do pretty much the same type of work over the course of the day. You leave at 5 o'clock, and you need to have access to a handful of applications to be able to do your work on a daily basis. In those industries, I feel like DaaS is still a pretty viable platform. If you look at call centers, again, these days, there's no such thing really as a call center. You got people working at home, but ultimately I need to deliver a unified, consistent experience to workers that are also maybe high turnover. So, as an IT professional, I'm like, man, I don't need to worry about buying hardware, provisioning hardware, shipping hardware to these individuals who may not be with my company 3 months from now because of a seasonal shift in my business. I'm basically going to, deliver those services. So I think in those industries, there's a lot of those opportunities still to be had.
I mean, let's go back. Okay, going back 1998, 1999,
okay.
Right? I mean, so long time ago. This is not new. I mean, Microsoft's been supporting this as a platform for a really long time.
That's right.
And when I say it's not the default, there are industries where, IT leadership became, adopted it. Yeah. They were believers, but it was like this. But those are the exceptions, not the rule.
That's
right.
True. That is true.
And there are places where once it becomes the default, it's the default. And I've talked and I've had CIOs a long time where it's like once they see it, they're like, oh, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life, and the entire it's like wildfire inside an organization. Yeah. But crossing over that it's a really wide river for a lot of places.
I think so.
And when I think about the average, mid-market's so loosely defined, but like the average 1,000 to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 seat company, DaaS is not the default in those businesses. Yeah. They're still shipping PCs or laptops. And you get into this default of everybody has to get a laptop, and we have to manage this asset, this physical inventory cycle.
That's right.
And I look at that, and that's and the same, I guess, is true in the Google Workspace side of the world, right? Where, the default is a Mac laptop with Google Workspace on it. You could run Chromebooks. And so I'm always interested in this conversation of why is this not the default? Why is there so much resistance to this? And how do you counter that when you're actually getting into conversations? Because it is a better way of managing your systems, right?
I agree. I'm a big fan. I think you remember I'm going to date myself.
I've already dated myself. Don't worry about it.
I'm going to date myself. Remember this old adage? It ain't your father's Oldsmobile.
Oh, geez.
Right?
Yeah.
Remember that? What I mean by that is I think the early IT, 98, 99, 2000, early experience with DaaS, VDI, call it whatever you want, guess what? You needed consistently bandwidth. You needed connectivity that was reliable, low latency, minimize your hops from point A to point B. And man, we're in 2025, 25 years ago. We didn't have that. No matter what the telcos will tell you, we didn't have that. And so the early experience, I feel like, wasn't what it can be. And I think a lot of people sort of turned their minds off of getting a true desktop-like experience, even though the machine is not necessarily mine, or it is mine, but I'm delivering a unified experience. So I think a lot of folks who tried DaaS 20 years ago never tried DaaS again, given some of the advancements, the innovation we've seen on the connectivity and network side.
Today we've got the technology kind of forked a little bit, right? Because you had VMware, you have Centrix, you have different approaches, different techniques. Microsoft has gotten back into the game in a big way. AWS supports, a cloud workspace.
Yes.
Microsoft is signaling that they're going to support both full desktop replacement as well as virtual remote apps, right?
Yeah.
Which is like this other push that's coming down. As a service provider, I think good service providers are really a lot like it's consultancy plus like integrator plus you take technology that everybody says is going to work and you actually have to make it work because now you're supporting it under a contract with somebody.
That's right.
How do you manage these waters and these shifts? Because people will show up and say, hey, you can just go do this thing. It's magic. It works perfect. You don't have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. You asked the question earlier about DaaS. How do you have that conversation? When I try to have conversations with CIOs, IT leaders, even business leaders who are not familiar with the as a service model or may not understand the distinction between Citrix or AVD or whatever, forget about the technology. I knew that was going to happen. Yeah. Forget about the technology, but think through it from the angle or the lens of security management and, like I said earlier, the onboarding, offboarding, the provisioning, deprovisioning of users. And if you look at it from that angle and you talk about security, well, I got applications that I can deliver in a consistent, secure sort of sandbox. I've got the ability to manage those applications and configure those applications any which way. And then, like I said, I've got seasonality, variability, all kinds of things in my business that can drive towards those outcomes. On top of that, you layer in the, do you really want to go through a hardware refresh cycle? That's the conversation. And I think going back to your question, you're very astute, is, man, as a service provider, my job isn't to sell technology. My job is to educate, enable, paint a picture of a world that could be, and still leverage technology to help elevate the business. I think the folks who do that well, do that really well. They're able to, align technology to serve some of those business outcomes, whether we're talking about DaaS or VMware or public cloud. It's the folks that have come in historically and said, look, I'm going to sell you this thing because I heard you have a backup problem. I'm going to sell you Veeam. Well, okay, but there may be a bigger problem, right? And so listening more than talking, understanding what triggers are leading to those decisions. Did you have ransomware that led to your change in leadership, which now is leading to a technology decision? If you're not listening for those things, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're not being true to what a MSP or a managed IT services company is all about.
There's no good way of phrasing this. One of the things you see a lot with companies now is they'll go through like massive layoffs, a big riff. And there gets positioned like the employees can keep all their equipment, right? Like, you have your laptop and you get to keep your laptop that was company issued. And it's one of these things that it's like unlimited PTO. It gets positioned as a positive, like, we're so good that we're doing this, right? Yeah. and you're laughing too, right? Because it's like, well, the other side of that, and what you actually know is going out and trying to figure out how to reclaim X thousand devices scattered all over the country or the globe. Yeah. Is a really difficult problem. Like asset management across that fleet is very difficult. And so, there's this like, we did this layoff and people keep their equipment. But on the other side, you're like, well, the reason why you're letting them keep their equipment is because you don't go through the pain of trying to get the equipment back and then dealing with it, right? Like it's this weird thing. Yeah. And I feel like, it's where I've seen DaaS deploy really successfully. It's like the initial thought process of like what people are buying it for versus what they actually get out of it are very disconnected, right? Mm-hmm. You talked about you touched on it briefly, where it's like intellectual property protection, right? Mm-hmm. Where's your data actually sitting? It's not sitting on the remote device; it's sitting on a centralized device.
That's right.
Who can access it? How do you control it? You have you don't have to worry about somebody leaving a laptop in a car and that laptop being stolen. What was on that laptop anymore? Yeah. Rapid provisioning. Do you have connection to the internet and a device already? Now you can start working.
Let's go. Yeah, you're onboarded in day one, right?
If you've never shipped equipment to Latin America, you don't really understand why that's a big deal or not, right? But then, now, I've seen this from another angle, which becomes, it feels like there's always this constant like friction and pressure between CapEx and OpEx models, especially within IT and companies when they go through. And cloud, of course, pushed this big shift into OpEx, like get rid of all your CapEx and move to OpEx. But then OpEx introduces another problem, which is your subscriptions and now your contractual subscription cost. And when when you're talking with a company about this and they're weighing it, like how much of that friction are you actually seeing, bubble up into the surface of a buying decision of, we actually want to own the stuff, we don't want to own the stuff, we're okay signing subscriptions, we're not okay signing subscriptions, because that's a whole other dynamic.
That's a whole other dynamic. Are we seeing it? Absolutely. We see it all the time. Old habits are hard to break. Even me, I've been in technology like yourself, Max, for a long, long time. Man, when I was running IT, I wanted to own this stuff. I felt like I needed to own this stuff. I felt like, man, that's how I show my value, because I am now in control of whatever assets. Don't forget about the fact that they depreciate rapidly over, no pun intended, over the last couple of years, or over the next couple of years. Forget about all that. But I wanted to own it because at the end of the day, I felt like if I had control, it was a control thing. I could basically unify, secure, manage those things in a much, much more interesting way. So I think a lot of the old school IT guys like myself who've been in the industry for 10, 20, 30 years still have that mindset. The shift is going to take over, I think, place over a little bit more of a phased approach. But yeah, we see that balance kind of conversation all the time. Man, do I run this completely as a service, or do I actually do it in some kind of hybrid way? I mean, we're seeing this for cloud. You mentioned cloud, right? I have not yet run into one organization that is truly what I will say cloud native, right? Meaning everything is in the cloud. I'm not talking about startups that have 5 guys who are working remotely and they're running SaaS applications all day long. I'm talking about a true mid-sized enterprise. There is a hybrid view. Some workloads live locally or on some colo that they're running, and some workloads are on AWS or Google or whatever. It's the same thing. Like, that balance is constantly within the IT organization.
You mentioned like this old mentality of IT. I would consider myself like old IT guy at this point, right? And I don't want to have anything. Like that's what's really funny is like I come from like building your own PCs, building your own networks, having console access to your routers, having data centers. Like, I've been through this.
Yeah.
And my default isn't like, I want to own infrastructure anymore, right? Because you understand what comes along with it. What I wonder about a lot, and especially when I see companies going through like ebbs and flows of their life cycles, is when you own infrastructure, and the company's under financial pressure or decides to make a strategic shift or realignment, you own the infrastructure. And when you're talking about a subscription service with the cloud, any SaaS application, right? Anything, and the company says, we need to, what happens all the time, right? You see the statement that's like, we need to cut costs by 20%. And you're like, you look at that and you're saying, well, this is contracted. We can breach the contract, which has financial penalties, but we don't have anything to give up here. And in owned equipment, you could just say, hey, we're going to push out a refresh cycle farther, typically is what happens. You end up with that's horrible too. I'm not advocating for it. But, in the subscription world and in the cloud world, all of a sudden you're like, what do we do here? And so how do you help people balance, like, that's what I'm saying, like this, like friction. How do you help people balance those two like extremes? Because any IT is a business enabler, right? So it has to help the business grow. It has to help the business realign, and that becomes another big, it's a big problem.
I think the balance, we were talking about it last night. I asked a philosophical question in the room, and again, a bunch of CIOs from fairly large organizations in the room, and I asked the question, is AI actually IT? And they're like, nobody's ever asked me that. The reason I asked it is AI leads to conversations around data, which leads to conversations around data governance. It leads to intellectual property. It opens up all these other conversations and decisions that have to be made. I think the balance comes from, it's going to sound very cliche, but man, if you don't start with the business outcome in mind, there doesn't matter what you balance, right? And what I mean by that is if you know that you've got to onboard your users, let's go back to the DaaS example, really, really quickly, because I've got, I got to get them productive like day one because of the nature of my, fluid business. That's the business driver. Then it's pretty easy to go back to the decision maker, the IT enabler, and say, man, that's what your goal is. Well, we've got 3 options. You can go and procure hardware, CapEx. You can provision hardware, ship hardware, again, time, money, energy, or you can go the other way. And so I always try to basically start with what we have to accomplish as a business, what those business outcomes are. And once we can frame that, man, it's so much easier to have those sort of, call them balanced, or, I think the word of the week, I've heard this word 17 times for whatever reason, convergence, right? Convergence. I don't know why this week, but I've heard it from 100 conversations.
I know why, but I'm not going to get into it.
Right? But to me, convergence, at least in the context of the last few conversations that I've had, is not, we're converging systems or we're converging data points into a data lake. No, it's literally balance. I think the word convergence can be replaced for balance, which is, hey, I don't know if this is necessarily the perfect path, but I know that I need to sort of, build an approach that, I can appease the old propeller head guys, and I can also appease some of my new modern sort of thinker guys.
Boy, you're just opening up a whole can of worms with this one.
I probably am, yeah.
Convergence is like this idea around like unification and reduction of tool sprawl, and like, one platform can do everything for you. And it's countering this idea of like best in breed point solutions. Like you end up with like 15 platforms, which just sucks. And one thing can do everything for you. And there's a lot of times where you don't want one platform doing everything for you, right? Like and especially when you're talking about like this idea of like the talking heads of like, and like you can, there was a dude and he worked for AOL and his title was like digital prophet, right? And if you've never seen this before, you got to search YouTube.
Okay.
And you have to look for the digital prophet from AOL.
And as soon as I finish up, I'll do that.
It is straight out of a movie script, right? Yeah. And I don't remember, this guy was getting paid really well, and like, but it's like, so convergence for me always like fits into that role of like, is it reality or not? And your question, is AI IT, is really interesting to me because, I think the role of IT is really misunderstood, in modern days, right? And the problem that IT has, in my view, is majority of the time they're not involved in the decision process of what applications are being run or what the business is doing, right? Simplest example. We signed a lease for this office. We're moving in 2 weeks. We need to be ready to go, right? And you're like, what do I do now, right? Yep. That happens all the time.
Yep.
But if you take that into bigger levels, it's like decisions are being made by marketing, by revenue and sales, by operations, and then it's like, okay, we've made this decision. Now you have to run it. And I see this as like a lot of pushback where it's like, well, in order for us to run it, because as soon as it turns into IT have to run it, now they have to own a platform they didn't make the decision around,
Yep.
And if it goes down, they get yelled at, right? And so you get into this weird thing. And I feel like that's like really the birth of shadow IT in a lot of ways, because it's like now you have all these applications that are running on your network that you didn't, you really weren't involved with deciding. But when they go down, you still get yelled at, and you're like, I don't even run this thing, and then where's the data and where's the governance? And so like, is AI IT is a interesting thought exercise, because is it a business application? Is it is it a line of business owns this thing? Is it infrastructure that IT has to maintain? How does it integrate with data and sovereignty and governance? And there's some horror stories that are going to come down the road here pretty soon for people.
Oh yeah, I don't know if there's a perfect answer of that question.
Yeah.
Is AI IT? I think I should write an article. What do you think? We should write an article together. But the first question you have to ask is IT in your business a cost center or is it a profit center, right?
Well,
is IT looked upon as an enabler of the business or, a necessary evil for the business?
Okay. A friend of mine running IT for a large global footprint, and he is sharing a conversation he has with me one day, which is basically somebody in finance tells him that IT is really expensive for the business. And his response is we're not expensive at all. We're cheap. He's got like a handful of people working for him.
Sure.
He's like, we're a lean org. We don't cost you anything.
Yeah.
I didn't buy this stuff.
Yeah.
You hired these people. They need laptops. That's not my fault. It's kind of like this response.
Yeah.
He had a much more elegant way of saying it. I'm paraphrasing for it to be a little bit funnier, but But this whole thing of like IT being a cost center versus a profit center, how do we help companies that are still looking at IT as cost centers, become like elevate into how do we actually leverage IT as an enabler or a profit center for the business?
I think if you look at, I haven't been able to find anybody to refute this. If you look at any business, any vertical, any size, really, what are we trying to do as a business, especially in modern kind of data-driven world with all this noise and hype around AI, convergence, globalization? You can pick all your fancy words, but number one is we're trying to do more with less, right? We feel like, hey, again, all the technologies feed into this. Can I use technology to do more with less? Can I displace or augment my human labor with technology to help me basically elevate the business? That's number one. Number two is, hey, can we delight, connect with, engage with customers in ways that we've never thought about before, right? Before, somebody calls your 1-800 number, you've got people to pick up the phone, you go through an IVR or whatever. Well, now the expectation from the consumer, the customer of our customers, is completely different. Your Gmail just works for the most part. Your phone, your iPhone, Android, whatever, just works. And so the expectation on the business community and the business IT community especially is, hey, this stuff has just got to work. So whether I connect with you on Facebook or Instagram or your website or a chatbot that's AI powered, I don't care. I want unified experience. So I need to be able to, delight customers in different sort of modalities. That's number two. Number three is, we're all dealing with this. I deal with this. I know you do. Is how do I secure, enable, and optimize work when work is no longer done in the four walls of my business, right? So those are the three things that ultimately every organization that I've run into over the last 10 years is trying to juggle. And so again, those if I get in front of a business decision maker, not an IT leader, and I kind of go through that sort of thesis, nobody can argue. And then you're like, okay, well, if you're trying to delight your customers in ways that you never thought about before, technology can help. And here's some examples. If you're trying to deal with remote, shouldn't pick on millennials, but people who don't never want to come in the office. Well, here you go. Here's ways technologies can help. SASE, vulnerability management, edge, whatever. And then, like I said, if you're trying to do more with less, we've got some ways to generate efficiency. So if you start again at the business level and you start kind of digging down, I think it's an easier shift than people think on how to go from a thought of cost center to profit center.
Your line of the expectation is it just works.
Yeah.
Creates really interesting problems for IT.
Absolutely.
And, when you have a experience or education gap of like what's on the other side.
Yeah.
An example, had a client years ago building out an office, and the CTOs, never experienced building, like running physical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And his idea was, we don't need to have wires in our office. I just want everything to be wireless. It works just fine at my house. And you're in this conversation, you're like, you're building out 50,000 square feet of space, and you're not going to probably get there, but at 200 square feet per person, your occupancy of the space is a lot of people, right? Like you're going to have a lot of devices in here. So then you're like, okay, well now you want to have a laptop and a phone and a tablet and then, screens and all these different things per person. And all of a sudden you turn around and you start counting these things up. And you're like, well, if you only have this many bodies in here, you have this many devices. Now you want them all to be wireless, but the reaction on the other side of the table is just kind of like, well, of course it should just work. And you're like, it doesn't just work.
Yeah. On top of that, you got what did I read recently? An average of 5 devices per employee in general. Mm-hmm. So there you go. You got 100 employees. You've got at least, and that doesn't include, you're right, the projectors and the smart TVs and all that in the office. You got hundreds and hundreds of devices. And then on the other variability to that particular problem is the whole, these buildings are no longer 2x4s, right? These, right? The concrete corners that don't have access and availability. Like there's all these other drivers. And then you got, we're in a beautiful studio here. We've got the sun behind us. We don't know what that does to our day-to-day, right?
What happened in that office that was also very interesting was they decided as a design feature that they were going to put glass. It was glass partitions for the offices and the conference rooms, and then they tinted the glass with this really cool tint. and the tent that they used basically was an RF shield, and they unintentionally, the designer built little Faraday cages.
Yep.
So none of the executives had working wireless in their offices, and there were no wires that were in their offices.
Right.
So, after they had moved in, then it turned into, okay, we now have to figure out how to pull wires into your offices, because your offices are like these little Faraday cages with no electromagnetic signals coming in and out. And you're like, and again, but you're in this like whole thing. It's like, oh, it should just work. And you're like, well, I don't know what to tell you, like you've she, and what do you do, right? You're like, you're in this.
I shouldn't admit this, but working for a very good technology company owned by Cox Communications, I've got a beautiful office in Atlanta that I rarely get to see because I'm constantly on the road. But and the first we moved in, we did a kind of return to office thing a couple months ago. So we had a couple of folks that walk in. We're like, what do you notice? And some of the young kids had no clue what I was trying to ask. What do you notice at these desks in the offices and the cubes? We have no phones. We basically operate off of our mobile devices, and then there's certain pockets of that floor where we got to run into the corner to get to the closest window to basically pick up my AT&T or Verizon. Everybody's having a problem. So I'm not picking on AT&T. Everybody's having a problem with our cell phone signal.
We can solve that for you. It's called distributed antenna systems. Is what you need.
Absolutely. I've already called Cox Private Networks. They're gonna hook me up here.
Yeah. It's but that's actually it's an interesting point where it's like what would you say, like the graybeards of like IT at this point, and how it's not even like an age thing. It's just like an experience thing of like, have you had any experience doing this? Because like all these sorts of little weird things pop up all the time. Like, if you're building an open concept floor plan, space, and people have to have a phone call, where do they go and how far do they have to walk in order to get to a room that they can close and have a private conversation in? And do you have, and the scary thing when you start talking about like larger office environments and campus environments, do you have cell phone service if people are calling 911 from their cell phones? And oh, by the way, it's not just can they call 911 by their cell phones, but can the PSAP now identify what floor you're on and what grid of the building you're in? And that becomes like a whole thing. And depending on the jurisdiction you're in, you're either some laws are like, if you know it's a problem, you have to fix it. But if you don't know it's a problem, then you don't have to address it. Like you can plead like ignorance with it. But then, you have really scary outcomes where it's like, oh, somebody calls 911 because they need an ambulance.
That's right.
And they don't know where they are, and again, is that an IT issue? Like, is that a facilities issue? Is that a legal issue? Like, who's responsible for that? And then if you go to the business and you say, hey, we can solve this problem that we've never had before, but it's only going to cost us this much money. And then the business says, well, we've never had that problem before. Do we need to spend the money? And then you're like, well, we should spend the money because but not having, cybersecurity is the same thing for me. It's like, we've never had a breach, but we shouldn't have you're kind of in this weird,
I think on top of that, I totally agree with everything you're saying about the misalignment. I think the misalignment also comes from, and I'm not pointing fingers. We've got some really smart young talent in IT who have gone through, some AWS certification. So they are now experts at, migrating, optimizing, securing workloads in AWS. And I don't know how you gain this knowledge if you haven't gone through the journey that you and I have gone through, and people like us in our demographic. Like you, I built PCs. Like you, I was a cool kid who got my mom and dad to convinced them to get me a second phone line so I could run a BBS, right? and wiring things and setting up servers and terminal server, pick whatever technology. We've gone through. I learned a lot of technology through the old OSI model.
Yeah.
I don't think I have run into a 20-something-year-old who's brilliant at DevOps, MLOps, understands all these amazing IDEs and tools to build these crazy applications, who may understand the OSI model, right? So when you start going from foundational, physical, all the way to application layer and everything in between, you just naturally think about problems in a different way. And I don't know the answer. It's just an observation that I've made.
The public cloud, I'll use that because I hate the hyperscaler term. You talk about like companies, established tenured, like mid-market, like real mid-market enterprise businesses, are in these kind of like states of some on-prem, some SaaS, some in a data center, some in a cloud. And I agree with you completely on that, but I'm starting to see, we saw with tech startups originally where it was like, okay, we're just gonna be 100% cloud. We're not gonna ever have physical infrastructure. And that made sense, right? Because they were starting from scratch. They were starting from scratch post AWS existing, post Google Workspace, like all these things. Like you could actually make a viable decision from zero with that. Now I'm seeing enterprises make these decisions of like, we're just gonna go all cloud. Like we're getting rid of all of our physical plant. And of course, Microsoft wants you to do this, like look at program licensing changes of like EA into CSP models and everything else, right? Like they want this shift. But funny thing happens when you like still have all of your physical infrastructure, desktops, laptops in an office, but now you remove all the resources that they're connecting to and you move them over some network connection and you put it somewhere else, farther away from you. And I kind of like, I've been watching this and I'm really curious about it. Like, does this push now the next shift of this? Like if a company decides one day they're going to wake up and they're going to get rid of, forget like Active Directory, talking about like, oh, we're not going to have file servers in our office anymore. Not to say that they haven't probably already done OneDrive or SharePoint to some degree, but like, we're going to get rid of all of our file servers and all of our data storage. It's going to leave our office and it's going to go to the cloud, and maybe we're close to our region because we plan it out and we're only like 20, 30 milliseconds away from it. Like, like I tell people, like people are going to notice the difference when you do this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if they're going to like be in with pitchforks, but they're going to notice the difference. And I've kind of had this thing in the back of my head for a while of like, does this shift? And as more companies do this, does this now force the entrance back into DaaS of like, hey, look, you want to have your computing resources next to your data because that's actually important to you?
I think if you look at Microsoft, they're betting a pretty nice chip on Azure Virtual Desktop. It's still cloud, running in the Azure infrastructure, but it's enabling a level of service that frankly replicates what we were doing 20 years ago in a much more efficient way. So I think there are situations, I still feel like it requires a lot of education. You're not selling a piece of technology, you're selling an experience, and you're selling security management and control, provisioning, deprovisioning. We talked about that a few minutes ago. That's what you're selling when you're talking about DaaS. So unless, whether it's an MSP or a consultant or an advisor, thinks through those drivers for those type of technologies, I think we're still going to be, you and I will be on this podcast in a year, 2 years, and still be contemplating why we don't get more, penetration across the whole DaaS environment.
Average leadership in IT, average tenure in IT leadership is sub 2 years. Right?
Yeah.
So now you're talking about a churn cycle that's going on with these companies, with people that actually understand the decisions that are being made and why and what the lineage of that decision was. And as you pointed out, you have certification paths within these cloud platforms that are like, oh, I'm an expert in this cloud platform yet. And I still have, daily conversations with somebody like, oh, we're on fill in the blank cloud, so we're secure and we don't have to worry about backups and we don't have to do this. And it's like all taken care of. And I'm like, it's 2025. Like, how do we still have this perception of it's just infrastructure that you're renting from somebody else and you still have to do all this stuff yourself? But this perception is coming from people that are making decisions. They're supposed to be the technical leaders in these companies that like have no idea what they're talking about. And I look at that and I'm like, how do you, the stakes are incredibly high with this, right? Because if you don't have backups and a region goes down, you're down, right?
Yeah.
And what I tell people is delete is a valid operation on a computing platform, right? So if somebody goes through and deletes all of your data, the cloud looks at that and says, oh, that was a valid operation. Like, we honor your delete. Is this evolution that's coming just like collective scar tissue that has to build up, with a bunch of bad stories, or is there like another awakening that we're going to see in terms of education of people understanding like what this actually means for them?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think we're betting the farm on Agentic. We talk a lot about automation. We talk a lot about, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if I could run my entire company over 2 monitors and I just sit there and I through a small language model or through some kind of interface, I can basically, magically control these environments. I think that's a lot of people's, especially the folks that did not go through some of that early learning, in the IT sort of like layered ecosystem. I think that's utopia for them. And so I think they're in for a rude awakening.
LogicWorks was a great acquisition from RapidScale and put you into the AWS consultancy space. And since then has expanded into Azure, which of course makes perfect sense, and then Google Cloud, which is also very interesting to me in terms of platforms. How, from a customer interaction and people coming to you, how much of this now cycle is still in this idea of this digital transformation of we decided we're gonna finally move our workload, and how much of it is oh shoot, we've done this and we didn't really know what we were doing and we were trying to manage it, and now we've had this surprise, right? And we see surprises of redundancy, resiliency, backup, security, cost. We lost the person that actually knew what they were doing here, and we didn't realize we didn't know what was still going on. How are you fitting as a service provider into your client engagements with these platforms?
The easiest door opener for a lot of these engagements is, you mentioned the word cost, right? There's few variables in the world of cost. Most of these organizations have tried the public cloud in some way, right? They've got applications, they're running some interesting workloads that are mission critical, for their particular business. They thought a few years ago that running it in the cloud was going to be a cheaper option. Just taking X, moving it into the cloud and calling it Cloud X is basically a rude awakening for them, right? We know the whole ingress egress thing. Outside of that, very little due diligence and centralized procurement process enablement. So even today, I got organizations, more mature organizations are a little bit better at centralizing. They've got an ML ops team or basically a cost enablement team or a FinOps team. But for the most part, mid-market, you've got P cards and credit cards floating around. So now I'm in marketing. You talked about shadow IT. Man, I'm just going to turn up a resource. It's easy. It's the gift and the curse. It's so easy to turn up a VM on AWS. Guess what? That's the same reason why you've got completely, no visibility into what your cost, situation is. So for us as a service provider, we come in and truly from a third-party perspective, we're able to look through, ultimately what's happening in your environment. The other thing that helps us as a service provider, given our partnership status with the AWSs and the Azures and the Googles of the world, is the ability for us to get funding for projects that otherwise the customers themselves wouldn't be able to get, right? Well, AWS has a thing called a MAP program, or Migration Acceleration Program. Mm-hmm. So if I can go get $1 for a project that, I know I need to do to modernize a legacy application and refactor it into the public cloud, this is my opportunity as a service provider to bring value.
I have such mixed feelings with these things. It's such a good thing for companies that if they're not taking advantage of, there's free money they should go get, right? 100%, I'm not going to argue with it, and it's wonderful that they do this. But at the same time, it's like getting a goodie bag from a heroin dealer. There's just,
Yeah. I'm going to use that one, by the way.
Let me help you modernize your application and be completely dependent and integrated on top of my cloud platform. Why are companies and why are people so misinformed with cost and the actual cost of going to cloud? Why is that still happening today?
I think there's a lot of reasons, but it boils down to lack of understanding, lack of just what is the cloud? We're talking about just compute. Are we talking about just storage? Are we talking about, basically just data in or out of the cloud? What is the cloud? And I think that in itself needs to be answered. These days, the conversation is all around data. It's my data. I need to basically protect it, secure it, grow it. Need to create a veracity model around it. Cool. Well, where are you going to put it? And those fundamental questions, at least from what we've seen, rarely get answered or asked to get answered to be able to then truly figure out, okay, let me actually do a true understanding over time what my cost structure is going to look like. All these guys have amazing little calculators and tools and whatnot. How many people do we know that actually use them and use them accurately and effectively?
I find you say in talking with a CIO and they've got a FinOps team.
Yeah.
I tell a lot of people that contracting with a service provider for FinOps is probably the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
Just because if you've never tried to like take apart in an AWS bill, for instance, and figure out what you're actually spending money on, like it's crazy. Like how many companies are just paying these bills and they have absolutely no idea what they're paying for, and does it even actually line up with what they're expecting to be spending?
Last night, again, going back to a really interesting conversation. Here's another one for you. Ready?
Yeah.
Should FinOps report to finance, the CFO, or should FinOps report to
Robby,
IT leader? Right?
Robby. Now let me actually take that a step farther. Who's actually responsible for cloud spend to begin with?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've seen this play out. I see this play out like weekly, right? Where it's like the Spider-Man meme of all the Spider-Mans pointing at each other. Have you seen this thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and how does it always start? Finance tells IT we got a lower cost in our spend and our IT bill. IT goes, okay, great. We don't actually control any of the applications that are running here. Hey, other business units, you need to do. We need to cut cost 20%. And where I've seen this mostly is in tech companies, right? So in those cases, maybe you have finance and you have IT infrastructure, and then maybe DevOps kind of in that role, and then you have engineering and software development teams, right? And so finance will tell the IT DevOps team we got to cut costs X%, and the DevOps team will tell the engineering team like, oh, we got to cut costs X%. We need an architectural change that we've already identified will solve this problem. The engineering team says, hey, it's not my KPI. I got to build this thing for the business that I have in my OKR. This and like I can't. There's no cycle time for this. And so they go back to DevOps and basically say, nope, and put the hand up, off with thee. And then you get this really funny situation with DevOps and finance of like, how do we actually do this? And then finance is always looking for like this magic pill that they can swallow of like, oh, how do we, what do we do here magically to like, drop our cost here? And you're like, there is no magic pill. Like an EDP doesn't do this for you. There's no RI or savings plan approach here that's going to solve this problem for you, right?
Yeah, there was no consensus last night either. Should FinOps report to finance or IT? You had very smart people running very large organizations. Not one person had a consistent sort of view on it.
I mean, that's also like, where does IT report to?
Right.
Like how many businesses are still putting IT into finance and administration, and that's kind of quasi reporting into CFOs as well. Like, I mean, again, is IT infrastructure, is software to the side, is there CTO building platforms? Like, and then who owns it, right?
But I think you're right. I mean, shameless plug. We've got a FinOps practice, and that's exactly our purpose. Is as a third party. I like to use the word agnostic, but doesn't mean we don't have an opinion. And we've got a lot of experience coming in and figuring out which workloads should sit where are opportunities to optimize. Why are you utilizing SSD expensive storage for stuff that you have? I mean, simple things like that. That again, it's the forest and the trees, right? When you're in the business day to day and you're just trying to keep the lights on and just go to the next problem and solve the next problem, having a third party, whether it's us or somebody else, coming and look at it from a much more kind of a higher view, it just makes to me a lot more sense.
You mean I shouldn't pick the most expensive compute resource possible to run my application on?
Sure, why not? Why not? If you're not paying for it.
Well, that's the thing. The people that are actually spinning these things up aren't paying for it most of the time, right?
It's like my daughter, who's no longer at home. She's in college, but when she was at home, turn up the music, turn up the lights, turn up the air conditioners to frickin' 62 degrees, right?
Yeah.
And because
why not?
Why not? Like, she doesn't see that utility bill from Georgia Power.
It's magic money.
Yeah, that's right. It's the same thing.
But this is where I get back to it. I'm surprised that like I find very little movement to maturity around these practices within companies, and the amount of money that's being spent on these things is so significant that the lack of maturity around it is really interesting to me. And I don't think you mentioned procurement earlier. procurement doesn't solve this problem, right? Like procurement's role within organizations isn't like how do we optimize application infrastructure costs, related application consumption, right? Like that's not a procurement function. Procurement, if you've dirty industry secrets, right? Like any service provider that has a practice of dealing with mid-market enterprise customers with procurement departments are inflating their costs going into the procurement cycle because they know at some point they're gonna have to deal with a procurement person who wants to get like that magic 10% off at the last minute. They just budget that in, and so like not to throw shade on procurement, but like what you're getting out of it isn't what you think you're getting out of it,
We again, what we try to do is, again, going back to the business side. Hey, if I can get in front of the decision maker, the business operator, on the opportunity to leverage technologies in ways that they've never thought about before, all that like noise, towards the contract signing and procurement generally it hasn't gone away, but it's definitely reduced because we've established a true, 3 R's. I always talk about the 3 R's, risk, mitigation, ROI, revenue, or revenue and ROI. If I can basically prove those 3 R's on a consistent basis with whatever I'm coming in from a technology perspective, generally that business owner's got accountability and ownership to be able to go back to procurement and kind of sell the case, for us, where we don't have to deal with those things.
I remember this vividly. I had a conversation with a CEO, and at the time they were spending 15% of their revenue on their cloud. And that's not what was so telling about the conversation. What was telling about the conversation was he knew he had to have that number below 9% or his business wasn't viable. And it was interesting to me because it was one of the first times I actually had somebody that I was interacting with that had that number at that level of awareness of like, we're spending this, the business is not viable here. And they were trying to figure out how to get there. And the unfortunate reality for them was it was a lot of pain. Like there was a lot of changes that they had to make in order to even think about rationalizing that. And the biggest problem that they had was they were in a committed EVP and they did not even have contractual. There was not even a possibility of spending less money under their contract that they had. Yeah. Right. And this is one of the ones that's also really fascinating to me, watching again the non-technical teams executing cloud contracts, because it's like, sign this magic piece of paper and we'll cut your cost 10%. But we're going to require you to spend 12% a year on support, which you need anyways. And we're also going to increase your cost 20% per year for the next 3 years under the terms of this agreement. Right. Yeah. And then you get like, all of a sudden you're like somewhere around like month 18 and the company wakes up and they're like, how do we fix this? And you're like, I don't know how you fix this. Like, why did you sign this? Yeah. Like what was, we needed the discount. You're like, like nobody put this in Excel or Google Sheets and look at what these numbers actually meant to you.
Very impressive that this individual actually had that view. I have rarely seen that in itself to say, okay, I need to get to 9%. Or I have zero margin profile, or my business is not viable. We don't often see that. I don't see that as I have these conversations. So that in itself to me tells a lot about this particular company. But I think you and I've talked about this. You spend a lot of time with high growth, highly funded, unicorn kind of businesses that are literally focused on hyper growth, user acquisition, customer acquisition. So the cloud spend side of the equation is they just don't have time to think about it, right? And this goes back to your business, our business, and as a third party to be able to come in and truly advise on what the potential is to go from 15 to 9%.
Many years ago, when I was running data centers, and we'd hire people, one of the things that I try to pound into people was, there's no such thing as a temporary patch cord, right? If you run a cable and you plug that cable in both ends, like you are never unplugging that cable, right? Like it's just not happening. So do it right the first time. And the thing about cloud that's fascinating to me is this idea of like ephemerality, like the whole push of like you can spin up resources infinite, you can turn them all off whenever you feel like it. The ephemerality goes away really quickly for an enterprise. Right. It very quickly you're in a contractual cycle, right? You lose the ephemerality to decrease your spend. Or you're running applications you don't even know what are running where and what the dependencies are anymore. It's just sitting there. We see all the time. Again, another reason why I advocate for FinOps so hard, or automated applications. It's like, stale resources aren't being consumed, unattached resources aren't being consumed, and this stuff adds up really fast. Quickly, fast.
Just your analogy, I love it. The goodie bag, analogy from earlier, but. Let's not forget the commitments that organizations make, because they're promised, credits, discount, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. That's another strategy. And again, I'm not blaming the public cloud companies.
Oh no, it's great for them.
Yeah. They got to run their business, right?
Yeah.
But I made a commitment today, and based on I needed to make sure that I aligned to some budget constraints from today. Did not anticipate what my growth and my cost structure is going to look like 6, 9, 12 months from now. Now all of a sudden I'm looking at this commitments, and I anticipated my growth to be X, but it didn't really quite get there. And now I've got these commitments that I've made. So you got that variable on top of it as well.
See, my version of heresy on this one is trying to convince our clients to get off their EDPs and to also get off of the enterprise support tiers that they're paying for, right? And that they can actually accomplish those two tasks. And it's, I understand that I come across as the crazy lunatic in that room, but that's like my dream state, of like, oh, we can actually now affect change for you if you don't have these things. A company's coming into the FinOps, right? We talk about cost as a big driver, and the problem with the cost as a big driver is it usually always starts out with like we need to address our cost, right? We're spending too much. We've woken up and we've realized like this is untenable for the business, and a lot of times that's like you don't even have awareness of what you're spending on. So how do you help, as an outsider, mature a business's understanding of what they're spending in cloud and actually get them to a point where you can help advocate for decisions or directions with them?
Yes. I mean, how do you establish trust, when you've just met somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, right? We obviously, excuse me, I come in with a lot of credentials, a lot of status with these public cloud companies. Obviously, we're pretty well regarded in our ecosystem of companies that provide these type of FinOps and other related services. So got some pedigree and some experience and some references I could bring to the table. Even that is not in itself enough. I still have to be kind of proof of the pudding, right? And so for us, it's crawling before we start running.
Yeah.
And running a marathon, right? Is basically coming in with a step function approach. Let's look at certain workloads. Let's do an assessment. Let's not do an overcommitment to this assessment. Let's show you some, absolutely impactful results that we can then leverage into some other, larger scope or larger projects or larger sort of managed services. Whatever it is, to me, it's always hey, let's advise, coach, and go through a step function to get to the final product.
I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm still surprised with how many companies are running cloud resources that don't have any sort of cost tagging, inside of that environment, right? So you're like, oh, we're spending $1 million a month on fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And we don't know. We kind of have these like loose ideas of where we're spending money. It's like $1 million. We're spending, $500,000 on compute. We're spending $200,000 on S3. We got Dynamo. We have, like whatever the services are, right? But they don't really know why, right? Or like what that actually relates to. And it's like you start from that standpoint, right? Yeah. It's like you have no information about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And of course, I understand what the other side of this endpoint is because I understand what best practices are, and I've seen companies that have gone through the pain to get all the way to the end state. And the end state's like, oh, we're running this application, which generates this revenue for the business, and it costs us this much to run. Like, do we want to stay in that business or not? And then they make decisions of like, yes, we're going to invest in this, or no, we're going to get rid of it. And you're like, okay, well, get rid of it. It's going to do X, Y, and Z for us, right? But there's a big delta between those two states. And when people are coming to you and saying, we have a cost problem, usually signifies that they're all the way over here, that they don't even know where to start. And what is, from a practice standpoint, when you walk in with somebody new that's like that, it's like, oh, we don't even understand how to read our bills, right? Like that's more than just being like, you're going to ingest your bills and help you figure out, like, answer what you're spending money on. It's like, how do you actually then walk them through that process, because you don't have control over the entire environment. Like, they still have to do work. You can say, hey, we need this information and you should do these things, but like, you're in this kind of weird position now where in order to deliver what they want you to deliver to them, they need to do stuff for you, right?
Remember back in the day when you were building data centers and you were running your own servers and you had control of you took so much pride. I'm making an assumption. I know you did. Took so much pride, because I know I did, on naming these things, right? Like, hey, I've got a process. So when I see a resource, you talk about cost tagging, it instigated this. When you see a particular resource or a list or a RB Tools report, whatever, boom, you have a very good idea of kind of what this environment looks like. Because it's so easy to turn up a resource on a public cloud, the discipline of naming, just simple things, naming conventions, aren't what they used to be, and they've kind of gone away. So you just sort of click through the process, you configure your little VPC, you put it in a few VMs, you allocate some storage, boom, you're good. Your application's running now. Go back 6 months, how many of us really remembered what we basically did? So for us as a FinOps practice type of organization, the first thing is just discipline on what it is that we're doing FinOps on. There's so much to be gained just from appropriate tagging, appropriate nomenclature, appropriate sort of classification.
Yeah, I mean, the cat's out of the bag with cloud, right? Like, it's what concerns me and what confuses me is this idea that's still out there of like cloud is cheaper, or like cloud is secure, or cloud is this, or cloud is that. And you're like, who gave you this impression that it's like none of these statements are true, right? You know, like, cloud is not cheaper. In most cases, it's more expensive. Now, it gives you different flexibility. There's different reasons. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm just saying, you know, if you told me that cloud is cheaper than running bare metal, I'm going to tell you you're absolutely wrong, and I can prove it to you, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not a moron in terms of like why you run cloud versus bare metal, or bare metal versus cloud. Like, there's layer 8 issues. I'll use your OSI point, right? There's layer 8 issues that come into those decisions, right? And all those are above my pay grade as an advisor, right? Like, I can give you information, but like, it's your business has to make that decision. And so, you know, where you guys sit, like, what's the other one that comes up a lot, right? Like this idea of multi-cloud, like, oh, you got to run AWS plus Google Cloud plus Azure. And I'm like, I feel like 95% of the environments I know are still single region, single AZ inside of AWS. Like we're talking about multi-cloud. Can we just get people multi-region? This show exists because of what we do at itbroker.com. If you're in the middle of a real tech decision right now, new technology, vendor selection, a contract that doesn't feel right, an M&A event that just landed on your lap, and so on, we help buyers like you get it right. Independent strategy, sourcing, and contract negotiation. No kickbacks, no sales quotas, just someone in your corner. Schedule a call at itbroker.com. Back to the episode.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's a definitely a resource issue. Like, in theory, we've been talking about multi-cloud. We as a ecosystem, as an industry, as a technology organization, we've been talking about multi-cloud since probably 2015. We knew that, hey, it makes little business sense to put all my eggs in one basket. I want to be able to hedge, and I want to be able to leverage, and I want to be able to distribute. But how many organizations have expertise across the multi-clouds? Just because I'm an expert at Bedrock, and I was making that up, am I an expert at Vertex? Probably not, right? Am I going to be able to hire $200,000-$300,000 a year engineers to basically align my applications across both of those platforms? Makes sense in theory, multi-cloud, but I also feel like, again, this is our strategy as a business. Is we're not trying to change religion. We are trying to make sure you are basically, if you're going down the path of Google and Amazon, or just Google, we've got a team, engineering, processes, technologies, automation, that can help you get there. And so that's what we're trying to do as a business, and we continue to evolve that way. But yeah, most organizations that I know that are like in the public cloud are not thinking, or they may be thinking it, but they're not implementing a multi-cloud strategy.
What's the right way for a company to engage with RapidScale as it relates to public cloud management, right? Because there's lots of different things that you offer. Mm-hmm. We talk about FinOps, mm-hmm. And there's like ideas around like, what is DevOps and what does it really mean, and what is support and how does this work, and NOC or SRE functions, or application modernization, or just like, hey, we know what we're actually doing, we can help you whiteboard this, kind of stuff. Like, what's the right way for companies to engage And I mean, look, people are in different like points of this circle, right? But like where do you guys fit in the best? And people like can walk away and be like, wow, that was really awesome.
I think the easiest call to action is get RapidScale to come in and do an assessment. Let's get a lay of the land. Let's understand, talked about it a lot, cost tagging, classification, what resources, what storage is allocated, what compute is that, just those simple things. Get us to come in, provide you an assessment or a nice report, and from there, whether you decide to continue to engage with RapidScale further and basically figure out a better optimization strategy or a security and governance strategy or both, that's on you. But at least you've got visibility into what's happening from a organization that's not so much in the business but can understand the overall architecture. We often 80%. I think I saw this number the other day internally. 92% of opportunities that start with an assessment end up in something larger where we can come in and help with, data pipelines and extraction of data into data lakes. That's all after the fact.
Right.
Until you understand the situation and your sort of environment, all that stuff is later.
That's an interesting point that you just made, right? Because data pipelines and data extraction is business process. It's not infrastructure, right? It's like there's infrastructure that has to be built in order to manage that data, that business process, but like there's a reason why the business needs that process to happen. And that's a big disconnect also when you talk about like the difference between IT and the relation to the business, cost center, profit center. It's like, what does the business actually need to do as a process in order to run? And then what do you do in order to run it?
Right. It's the question of is AI IT. You could say the same thing about data. Is the data pipeline, data governance, data extraction, data enrichment, is that part of IT? Is that part of the business? Is that part of strategy? Is that part of finance? These are the hard questions that need to be first asked to be able to then answer, to then align. I think the real way to go about in managing IT, like again, back in the day when I was running IT, I'm dating myself, it was pretty, relatively speaking, it was easy, right? Business was done in the four walls. My employees were in the four walls. They came in at 9, they left at 4, half of them didn't work, they went home, and we didn't really think about work until the next day. Obviously, that world no longer exists. So those challenges lead to IT having to think about remote work, security, edge, ransomware, SASE. Like there's 1,000 things that IT people have to think about. Then you add the complexity of different types of infrastructure, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, data. Now, you've got the whole layer of AI. Can't imagine what IT leaders have to think about on a day-to-day basis. The only way to do this, just like what I do personally with my finances, I've got an expert. Just like I do with my accounting, I have an expert. You got to partner with people that basically can bring some level of expertise.
I find a lot of suspicion with CSPs, like companies. It's odd to me, but like this idea that there's like, there's some catch, like why would I engage with a CSP versus just work with Amazon directly? Why do I need a CSP versus working with Microsoft directly? I mean, the Google one's easy because like you can't talk to anybody at Google in the first place, right? But like with these other companies, it's like this, like, oh, why should I engage with a CSP? Like, why shouldn't I just work with Amazon directly? And I have my version of that answer. I'm curious to hear yours.
I'll simplify. We've talked a little bit about potential funding. The innovation funds available across these environments are, again, they're no dummies. They're not just giving you free money. We know this, right? But working with a CSP can help you get that money in ways that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do. Also, again, we didn't buy these credentials. We earned them through accreditation, certifications. All of our engineers basically going through a whole vetting process. Well, that gives us now a right to basically, I'll call it the bat phone, into these folks. So yeah, good luck trying to go through your TAM or your direct interface into these environments. We can definitely help you there. That's probably the biggest reason. And then thirdly is, just as we're about to go to reInvent coming up here shortly, right? I'm not sure how many different microservices AWS is going to launch just in the realm of AI.
And how many they're going to kill off, too.
And how many they're going to kill off, right?
Right.
Just last year, I remember there were at least 15 that I remember that they actually, PR and, a big, to-do about these things. Well, how are you as a business who's a HVAC company, or you're a logistics company or a supply chain business, how are you supposed to keep up with all this innovation that's happening? That's what we as a CSP basically try to do. Again, we are incented to do so because the next time we get a project to migrate a legacy app into these environments, guess what? It's advantageous for us to say, oh yeah, there's this new thing that AWS launched last year that we can leverage to basically make this business function happen. That's our job. That's not your job. And so I would say those would be my answers, kind of the top three on engaging a CSP.
We should talk about VMware.
Uh-oh.
Now, let me see. How do I want to phrase this, right? VMware is acquiring company has got to make a return on their investment, right? And there's been a lot of, it's kind of almost like, I don't want to say that there wasn't a plan, but it was like the plan is definitely evolving as time is passing of like, what are we going to do and how do we approach this? And I feel like with companies, they had one of a few options, right? If you had a VMware-based environment, it was re-sign at whatever deal you were offered and punt the decision down a few years and try to deal with it later. Or there became like these, accelerated migrations, VMware Nutanix, VMware to something else, Proxmox, all these different platforms, right, that came up. And some people went down that road, and I couldn't say like percentage-wise, like what did what versus the other, but it feels like the punt the decision, the easiest decision to make is always to do nothing, just to spend more money, right?
Absolutely.
It has the least risk.
Yep.
We're just going to do nothing. It's just going to cost us more, right? But now it's like those chickens are coming home to roost, we're seeing. And now we're getting into this, like anybody that made the decision to punt is now being forced to actually make a real decision. And that real decision is, do they continue to invest in this platform? And what does that investment actually mean? Or do we do something else? And, we talk about like application modernization, like how many of these workloads were just pulled out of an on-premise environment and shoved into a cloud environment because they thought they were going to get better economics out of that cloud vendor for X years, and then like they're finding out that maybe it's not there as well. For those companies, there's a bunch of different roads you can take them down, right? It's just like, how are you running the infrastructure? Where is it running? But we haven't even really scratched the surface on like application modernization, because like going from premise to cloud is not just like, hey, let's just take this box, virtualize it, shove it up into a cloud platform. It's, what is this application actually doing, and how do you make it cloudy, right?
Yeah.
So what is that conversation like when you're talking with a CIO, or you're talking with, fill in the blank business leader, of like, we've got this application, and probably starts with cost again. Like, we've got this cost problem we have to address.
Before it goes to the conversation around cost, this is so many examples in the real world where you go into an organization and they built an application, homegrown thing that they ran, built 15 years ago. The person who was responsible for this application is retired, no longer with the business. Do you have any source code? No. Do you have any executables? No. So beyond, and I'm not making this up.
No, I know you're not making it up. I'm just laughing because I have all these like stories popping in my head.
This is real. This is real. And so you're like, and then they're like, yeah, we need to get this thing in the cloud. So how do you make it cloudy? Well, before you even start talking about costs, you got to think about how to refactor this thing. What is it? What's the business process? How do you immerse yourself in those business processes to be able to, redo this application in a way that does make sense in the future? So those are a lot of the first conversations that we have. Is the foundational? I call it the foundational side of the application sort of modernization bucket. Once you get past that, then you talk about VMware. My God, like, are you impacted? Most organizations are. What does that look like? Well, we're seeing a 3x license increase. We used to buy, we had a reseller that would sell us VMware licenses. Unfortunately, that reseller is no longer part of the club. Now what are my options? Well, I've got some options, but it starts with two fundamental questions, in my opinion. You know, where is that application, and where are the people who are accessing that application? Once you can answer those questions, kind of in a 50,000-foot view, then you can start mapping out a journey to Nutanix or native, public cloud or Red Hat or whatever the different virtualization platforms are. But before having those conversations, the rest of it is frankly just a I don't know, an academic exercise.
Being in IT for a long time, two of my most hated acronyms are ROI and TCO. And I say that because it is the most disconnected way that you can actually go through a technology purchase related to what the business actually needs. Mm-hmm. Like, and we can talk about this in lots of different phrases. I can give lots of different examples, but it's like, what's the total return on investment for this thing? It's like you're buying a network for your office to connect people to the internet in order to do work. What do you mean, what's the ROI on doing a switch upgrade? Are we really having this conversation right now? What's the ROI on having electricity in your building? There's some of these things that are just like so funny to me. But what I've been thinking about for a long time, and I want to get your take on, is, you used to use the phrases like, is AI IT? Where does IT respond? Who owns cloud spend? Like, it feels like we need a new language for IT to talk with the business and vice versa. And what should that look like? Like, what is the metrics, or what is the dialogue that a CFO and a CIO should be having in relationship to, what the COO is doing, or what the CMO needs, or what's going on?
Wow, that's an interesting one. What is the language? Man, IT people, remember again, I see this today. CFOs constantly are blaming IT people because they're like, man, I asked for a budget. And I got the typical, well, it depends. You talked about TCO and ROI. That's a term I absolutely hate, even though I use it. Right?
Well, because that's what people buy, right?
It depends. It depends on a lot of things. Let me walk you through what it depends on.
I say it depends on everything. Yes,
it depends on everything.
Yes.
So CFOs are constantly complaining that IT leaders do not know how to budget, can never give a straight answer on what the budget is, because often we don't know.
Right.
We don't know. I think that's the first bridge that has to be built. Understanding the dependencies for the CFO to say, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying by saying it depends, because I realize that it depends on A, B, and Z. I think that in itself, if we could somehow magically, you and I can craft a new bridge or a new paradigm where those lost in translation conversations happen less, I think that's a great start for us.
Okay, I mean, so the easiest example is in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Okay, you've used some of the acronyms like SASE and this, that, and the next thing, right? And a lot of times these platforms come into place because, you've pointed out, like, you don't have people in an office anymore. You need to have people remote. Those people need to access your data. They need to do it in a secure way. You want to have maybe you're in a compliance regime, so you need to have some sort of audit and oversight, right? And I find like a lot of companies that implement ZTNA aren't doing it because they're really trying to figure out a better security model. It was like, oh, we need all the actual user authentication audit, capabilities that come out of ZTNA, and we just get all the security as a byproduct, right? But that it becomes an enabler technology of like, we don't have people in an office anymore and people are remote and they have to connect to our applications, right? Yeah. Not like, so what's the ROI?
To connecting to Salesforce? I don't know.
Right, or like, there's some things that are become mandated, right? Insurance mandates that you do security awareness training, right? So like, if it's an insurance mandate to do our, security awareness training, is there an ROI attached to that one, or is it a requirement in order for the business to actually get insurance, which it needs to function, right? Like, so this is what I'm saying. Like, it feels like there's a giant, like, like the lines don't come across where, and I find this and security, cybersecurity specifically is so difficult because, there's this idea and this perception of like, we can pick a level between 0 and 10 for how secure we want to be. And that relates to some sort of cost model that then says, I want to be like a 6.25.
Yeah, which is $6.25 million on an annual basis. Great.
Right. And then we're going to be at a 6.25 level of security, right? And you're like, it doesn't really work that way.
It's I spend a lot of time in cybersecurity and I follow a lot of these companies that are doing some interesting things. One of the things that I continue to see is, again, leveraging of data to help lost in translation situations, right? CEOs talking language A, talking Mandarin, CSO, the security officer, speaking Russian, and what that looks like is CSO comes into the door into the office and says, look, we've got these number of vulnerabilities. I have basically ranked from high priority to mid priority to low priority. I need $5 million to basically address these things. And by the way, I'm going to focus on the high priorities. And then if you look at the list, and the CEO looks at this list, and it's server patching, and you've got lack of, like you said, multi-factor is there, but it's not on. There's all these things that the CEO has no clue to what he or she is basically reading. And so a lot of these organizations have now said, okay, well, I will utilize third-party data from companies, industries like mine, to be able to say, you know what, an example of a data leak that was a result of an MFA led to $5 million of damages for this company. That's the translation.
Right.
That person's going to pay attention to that one, right? And so I think those are it goes back to, honestly, the money. How do you take technology, align it, maybe not an ROI, but a risk impact to the business? I think those are some simpler ways, simple in theory, ways to basically create that bridge.
So you've said two things I'm going to come back to really quickly. The first one was you talk about budgeting and it depends, right? And building financial models is not like the strong suit of most IT practitioners, right? Where you're sitting inside of an Excel spreadsheet and creating something where somebody can like change the values of field A7 and like the whole thing trickles down. It's like, oh, if we do this, this is what's going to happen to us in terms of cost. So maybe like, do we need to help like IT teams figure out how to build these things out, or is this like the role of finance to help build the model for IT to then implement and fill in some numbers on, and like, does that help alleviate some of this issue?
I think in theory, we've been talking about this for a long time in industry. Is, hey, if finance gives us a template that we can fill in to get a little bit more accurate on what our expenditures are going to be in the realm of cyber insurance driven security best practices, as an example, great, we'll do that. The problem is that finance person who's putting that template together does not understand MFA or SSO or EDR or MDR or end user security training, all of the things that are basically leading to technology decisions that IT people have to make. So I don't know. I really don't know how you create, sort of a common language where at a high level, the CFO is going to be able to build a template to basically budgetize these things.
The insurance thing is an interesting an example, right? Because as a insurance company, you're assessing risk, and if the company doesn't have MFA in place, that they have higher risk. And then there's some actuary somewhere that's actually trying to build out a model and saying, if you have MFA, your risk, your potential loss for us risk decreases, increases, whatever it is, right? And there's now becoming enough data where people are starting to actually build these models out. But now, as a recipient of that, the company, if I don't have MFA, one of two things are going to happen to me, right? Either I'm not insurable, or my insurance premium is higher, right? And so now then the company gets to make a decision also, which becomes like, oh, if it's going to cost us $15,000 to implement this program that's going to decrease our insurance by $18,000, is it worth the energy to spend it to save the $3,000 right now? Right? Because like that's also like it's this. By the way, this is a concept was a hard thing for me to learn when I was still in-house IT with companies. Like just even advocating for like, we should do this because of these financial reasons or risk or resilience or whatever the different things, of being able to say like, okay, we've evaluated, we've just decided not to do it because it's just not worth it to us. Right.
Yeah.
Because that's also the big problem here. Like, do you have MFA or not? Well, you should have MFA. It's the cheapest way to actually meaningfully improve your security posture. Like, I mean, it's like, it's crazy, but then it's like, what are you actually spending? How much does it cost to roll out? What do you have to do in order to support it and help desk? How do you communicate that effectively? Like, can you actually quantify it and be like, there's no like, we've implemented RFA, MFA, and our risk score has gone from 7 to 6 now, or like,
there's no ways to do that. There's so many other variables. I mean, are we delivering one-time codes to a phone? Who owns those phones? Who's the carrier behind there's all these other ancillary things that you don't, maybe us IT guys think about, but the finance folks don't have that. And maybe that's the simple answer, is you literally we used to do this, had like literally, if you will, a cheat sheet of acronyms and things that are necessary for the business to sustain, survive, thrive, and be secure. And you literally have to, maybe that's our job. Maybe we've done a poor job. And sometimes we have. I know I used to get frustrated with the business side of the house when they would ask quote unquote dumb questions. They weren't dumb questions at all. What are you doing over there? What is MFA? And I'd be like, man, come on, man. You got Google like I do. Instead of being patient and actually spending some time with these folks that are, basically trying to understand some of the words that, these acronyms that we use on this side of the house.
I mean, but this fundamentally flows into so many things, right? Because DaaS gets evaluated against what are we currently spending, right? I mean, this goes back to like TCROI, like all these things. A lot of times IT purchasing is, we are currently spending X on something, and now we want to change that and spend it on something else instead, and it's usually well-intentioned, like we want to improve things, but like that improvement cycle for an IT team, it gets cast against what are we currently spending on that thing, and then can you explain or rationalize the delta of why the business should spend more? We currently spend, $700 a desktop, in our environment, and we want to move that from $700 a desktop on a 4-year replacement cycle, and maybe we know how much we're spending to support that and how many help desk tickets we've got against that asset, or maybe we don't, and usually this is where IT needs to really invest a lot of energy, in my opinion, is like actually building out this case. Because if you could say the $700 desktop requires 40 hours per year of our time, and this $1,000 desktop requires 4 hours a year of our time, like you can right. But then DaaS shows up and you're like, well, how much are we actually spending on this desktop right now? You're like, well, it's $700 and we replace it every 4 years, so it's only costing us this much per month, and we want to do this DaaS thing instead, which is going to cost us this much per month. And they go, why should we do this? And
but there's a percentage of these devices that get lost, left behind in an Uber. I put that in the cost equation. Yeah, I mean, and DaaS is actually simpler to justify, because they're pretty known variables in that equation, right? You use 11 applications on average on an ongoing basis. Those 11 applications need to be supported on a Citrix environment or an AVD environment. Those applications, need accessibility between the hours of, this is the exercise we go through when we're sizing out or making decisions on, hey, this should be persistence desktop, or it should be a session-based sort of desktop environment. But like, that's what we do, right? To be able to say, all right, you, Mr. and Mrs. Business Owner, don't need to worry about overspending, over-investing, over-engineering, because we've done a little bit more due diligence on what your user profiles and personas are. Like, it's easier to do than some of the other, we've talked a lot about cloud today. It's easier to do on that side versus on this.
I'm going to push back on something here, right? Where it's like, at a core, really core selection process, persistent versus session-based DaaS, right? I will tell you, almost 100% of the people that are on the receiving end of that conversation have no idea what either of those things mean.
No.
And they don't. And so now, again, the easiest decision to make is to do nothing. So like now you're evaluating new technology and you're being given a selection process of like, hey, we can do persistent or we can do session-based, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And they're like,
Oh.
Yeah. What does this mean? And so then you're like, well, I don't know what this means. So it's scary. I shouldn't do anything in the first place, right? Because am I picking the right one? Am I picking the wrong one? The one that cracks me up the most when I talk about any sort of remote desktop type technology is the immediate question of, well, what does it look like? I'm like, well, what do you mean? What does it look like? Well, what does it look like? And I'm like, it looks like exactly what you're looking like right now, except it's not running on your computer in front of you.
Yeah.
It's running on a computer in a data center,
Yeah.
But that's where I'm saying, like, I have to push back a little bit on this, because going through that evaluation, saying this is what you're actually running and this is what you should do and here's your options, optionality almost creates a bigger problem in some way. Apparently they're doing work on the fire alarm.
Okay. Hey,
hopefully we edit that one out. That'll be funny.
that was awesome.
But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'd be really curious if you actually like broke down your sales cycle, into that conversation of getting to that point, like as like a stage of like, oh, we got to the point where we're talking about like persistence versus session-based desktops and like what actually happened from that point forward.
Yeah, I don't know if I could do that, but that's a good point. I mean, I pride myself on making things complex in very simplistic ways. If I have one superpower, it would be that, right? I try to give as many examples. Like you actually said something that raised an interesting thought. Well, what does it look like? Well, it looks like what it looks like. Mm-hmm. Well, an example of how you address potentially that as well. Have you ever been into a doctor's office? Yeah. When the nurse comes in or the PA comes in and they log into this thing, regardless of what office they're in, they're basically getting to their my chart on Epic.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Well, there you go. That's what it looks like. Is no matter where you are, no matter what machine you're on, no matter what floor you're on, you're basically in your environment. So that's a healthcare example, but you can give 100 other examples.
Well, I mean, this is something I struggle with a lot, right? Because we are neutral arbiters of like information for our clients, right? You take any category of technology, there's dozens or hundreds of people and service providers inside of that category, and not even talking about like what Gartner is tracking, like 16 logos on a name. I mean, there's for every logo on a Gartner chart, there's 50 to 100 behind them that are probably could be interesting for you, right? Mm-hmm. And I always find this interesting, especially when I'm having an interaction with a technical counterpart, client, of like, is my job to provide you a lot of information for you to make an informed decision and like actually run you through like, here's all the things that you need to know in order to make an informed decision of the tech, of the whatever differences between these three, companies, or is my job for you to tell you this is the right answer? Yeah. And if I was in your shoes, this is what you should do. And then, of course, like walking that line really carefully of saying, I'm going to give you enough information that you understand that you're coming into this and you're making an informed decision, but I'm going to also tell you this is the right choice, right? Yeah. And that's kind of like the same thing here when we talk about like persistent versus session-based, like it is the right answer being able to say, oh, it's just going to cost you this much to run this application, not what actually like another choices that they have to make.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I don't know, M365 licenses, right? There are business reasons why you need an E3 versus an E1 or an E5 or whatever, right? But most organizations, you need a PhD to understand some of these licensing schemes. Our job is the latter. I think you said it perfectly. Our job is to not come in with an encyclopedia of options, cereal box aisle, at the local supermarket. Our job is to say, look, we understand what you're trying to accomplish, and in order to accomplish what you need to accomplish, here's basically two options or three options, and for each of those, there's no perfect. There's a pro and a con. Let me walk you through that, and let me walk you through the implications of that. To me, that's the job.
I wish Microsoft licensing was as simple as E1, E3, and E5,
Well,
and not, like what it actually is. Because if it was just E1, E3, E5, it would be really nice. But then you're like frontline, enterprise, this,
Business
that, the next
basic,
thing.
this, that, yeah.
And then you get into like, there's like variations of E1 and E3 and E5, and then there's add-on packages to each one of those things, and then there's like, are you buying it this way? Are you buying it that way? What's and
Do you
you're
want
like,
Intune? Do you have your own? Yeah.
it's now we're gonna have teams split off in the EU and probably in the US as well. Like it's like no wonder like people have no idea what's actually going on. Like
you need an actuary to help you with that.
well, but again, right back to the original point, Rich, is it's like I wonder about this a lot of just like who's. I'm not saying like who's to blame, but like who can step up the most effectively to like solve this communication gap, right? And the frustration becomes, of course, if you're in IT and you're trying to solve a business problem that like there's like this train wreck about to happen in front of you that you want to get ahead of. But like if you can't communicate what that actually is, the person on the other side of the table, they're never going to see it. Like we need to do something, and tech marketing makes this even worse because then an acronym is created and everybody piles into that acronym and like, oh yeah, we do X, Y, and Z. Of course, we're a fill in the blank acronym company as well. And you're like, no, you're not. And or they make it really easy to confuse you in terms of like what the feature set of is. It's like you get these like spec sheets that are like, you're like, oh yeah, we have the fastest firewall in the market as long as it's 64 byte packets at like this frame size, and you're like. Does that actually, like, what does that apply to? Like, how do I evaluate this?
It reminds me, early days of, used to sell email encryption, so secure messaging.
Oh, yeah.
PKI-based, basically a web service PKI-based. We had a patent for it. And, the first few years of that business, we were basically trying to sell, hey, my AES is bigger than yours, and we could not figure out as engineers, like, why we weren't successful selling it that way. It was only when we shifted to try to really sell it more like an insurance policy, where we started to see some success from a compliance angle,
right?
Instead of coming in and talking about PKI. People will look at you like, sorry, what's a key? What's a key pair?
Yeah.
What's a key exchange? What's a this? What's a that?
Yep.
And you're like, and you just couldn't understand. Again, math guys and cryptography guys and engineers are like, we don't understand. Our technology is amazing, and it's no different in any other realm.
But it's so true, right? Because it's like you want your IT team to be I'm gonna steal somebody's line. You want your IT team to be the turbo nerds of IT, but then at the same time, like if they're locked in the dungeon, and you've got the turbo nerds of IT locked in the dungeon, then like that are not socialized, and you don't know how to talk to them because you never like take them out of the dungeon and like talk to them. And that's what I'm like. It's like this is weird like. How do we like line this up a little bit better? Because again, I started this off by asking you like, why is not every company on the planet running DaaS? Like that was one of my first questions I asked, and I circle back around that, and it's like, is this a technology issue? Is this a positioning issue? Is this like an awareness issue? People don't even know this product exists, which I think is true.
Sure.
What is it? How do we run it? What does it look like? What's the cost differential for it? How do I model what I'm currently spending? I've never actually done any sort of modeling of what it costs me to maintain a PC long term, how many of them I lose per year,
It's an education enablement awareness issue for sure. It's rarely. Think about it. Is there anything that is in technology a technology issue? I don't know. I think about that all the time. I don't think anything is a technology issue. Technology is built, engineered. Again, some engineering processes are better than others. Some technologies are better than others. But in general, technology is often table stakes. It's the education and enablement, and I think I spend a lot of time with strategic advisors, partners, consultants who are trying to elevate a business, their book of business, and the ones who do it well, the ones who are very successful, are not talking, SKUs. Yeah, they're talking outcomes, solutions, strategy, acquisition, valuations. Like, hey, if I can help you leverage technology for you to streamline your operations and your data flows to be able to serve more customers in the same amount of time, guess what that does for your valuations? Boom. That's the consultant right there.
Right. Or, right, the opposite side of that is if you're talking about private equity or divestiture, can you meaningfully increase EBITDA, because that affects your, exit multiple, right? That's the only place where I really see like drastic cost cutting, really like have like a massive financial outcome, like the difference, right? Like, what does a 10% reduction in cost really mean to a business? Well, like normal business probably not that much, but you're like, if a 10% reduction in cost increases your like EBITDA X percent, which then, and your exit multiple is based off that, like that matters.
Matters.
That matters a lot. It's you say selling SKUs. We're talking about AWS reInvent coming up. We'll pick on Amazon. Amazon has several hundred products within their environment, which means for each one of those products, you also have the decision of whether or not you're going to buy the product for Amazon or if you're going to buy the base compute and use one of probably 5 to 10 different packages that fit within that product SKU as well. So now you're like, okay, there's probably like 1,000 different ways of doing the base infrastructure within AWS.
And do I go to the marketplace? Do I go to CSP marketplace? There's all these complexities and decisions that I got to make around that.
And when you're talking, like, you're at dinner last night and you're talking with CIOs. When you're in this conversation with CIOs, they're trying to navigate this and really figure out, like, do we invest in this Amazon SKU? Is going to be around in 5 years? Is this the right SKU for us to go about? We don't have capability in this thing right now. The business is telling us that we have to figure out AI. What is AI? Do we own it? Does somebody else own it? How do you like shepherd and guide somebody down this path? Because now you're seeing enough companies over a broad swath of industries that are doing this, and some are successful and some are not so successful.
Yeah, I think we talked about the CSP. Why go through a CSP or work with a CSP instead of trying to do it yourself? With the certifications, credentials, and the fact that our people sit in the same offices, with some of these public cloud companies, gives us a lot of advantage and visibility and knowledge and experience into what's happening. So my approach is always the same. Keep it on the business side. Try to teach the team that. Make it aligned to business outcomes, and come in with use cases. Hey, here's a company like yours, same size, with these challenges that did this, and if we feel like, and we helped in this way, here's an option. I feel like talking in that sort of true activity or enablement in the market outcome perspective, it just helps. Again, not about technology, but about a process that we can basically help activate.
And there's a lot of variations in that, right? There's like, what should we do? Or how should we do it?
Yeah.
Or
why?
Why should we do it?
Yeah.
Right? Then there's like can you help me do it? We did this, but now we can't run it. We've lost resources. Can you help me keep it up? I had a CTO tell me once upon a time that he was traveling a lot, and he was always his fear. I hate the question like what keeps you up at night, but like he was like very straightforward of like every time I'm on a plane, I'm afraid that my our platform is going to go down. And nobody's accountable to me about it. Like even his team, it was like this whole thing, like what would actually happen if that came? It was push come to shove. And it was like, do I have a contractual obligation with somebody that has to look at this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for me, just so that way I know there's always somebody responsible for this thing, right? And you're like, well, what about your team? And it's like, well, people like to go out and like World Series is on, and all of a sudden so-and-so just decides not to answer their phone in the middle of the night because they had a wild night. What happens, right?
How many people have you run into, companies that you've run into that have a run book, a playbook, call it whatever you want, that has never been opened, never been tested, and never been through the ringer, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Who's the first line of defense? Oh, that was John. John Smith with... Where is John? Well, John, retired like 18 months ago, and we see it all the time. And then it goes back to, again, how we go about and enable service-oriented approaches with organizations is, again, being the third party. We say this a lot. Agnostic, cloud, view doesn't mean we don't have an opinion.
Yeah. I think this is one of the big misconceptions I find, and I haven't really found a good counter to it, but in order to be a good service provider, you have to hit scale. In order to hit scale, you have to have standardization, right? You have to have a repeatable, standardized way of approaching things, right? Because it's the only way you can scale and grow. Like you can't, I mean, you can be a nice boutique-y, have a dozen or 2 dozen clients, but like when you start talking about any sort of service provider that has figured out how to scale and grow, it requires standardization. Well, you know what? Standardization is actually good for you to be forced into as a company, because if you haven't already adopted standard processes, like somebody else forcing you to adopt standardization is actually really good for you, because,
And it wasn't just standardization for the sake of standardization. That standardization comes from the scale and the experience and being able to, sort of take those lessons learned and basically bring them to you.
US East 1 had a big outage recently, and Azure had an outage shortly after that.
How come we're talking more about the AWS outage and not as much about the Azure outage?
I think because most people let's just be real. Like more consumer services are on Amazon than are on Azure, right? So when Azure goes offline, businesses are impacted, but it's not like the news is reporting about it. Like it has a different And I think also with Azure, it was so close to the AWS outage that it wasn't like, I just don't think they had the same impact for people. Like it wasn't like, oh, the internet's down.
It's a great point though about more consumer services. Therefore, more people who are making more noise are impacted by whatever application they're trying to access.
I was in a conversation after AWS, after the initial outage of like what it was, like all these different things. And the point that I was trying to make was 2 things. And the first one is this actually happens pretty often. Like you can, there's lots of very, major infrastructure outages on these platforms. All in all, they're very stable and they're very resilient and they're really well operated. I mean, like when you talk about like just what their effective real uptime is, it's impressive, right? Like it is awing. But they have outages. Everybody has outages. And like you will always have some event where it's like, oh, we pushed something. Like something when configuration happened. This weird thing happened. Early 2000s, we were getting bit flipped from like solar flares, so
DNS outages like we saw,
And so then you immediately see this like frenzy of like, oh, we got to migrate off of AWS, and like all these like, I call them like the vultures. The vultures show up online of like doing all this different stuff. And I was in this conversation and I was explaining like, in 2 days, nobody's going to remember this. Yeah. So when I think about that, what frustrates me about that statement of like in 2 days, nobody's going to remember this is that now, you're a service provider. You've got a lot of customers on both these platforms. Just had big outages. When the outages happen, people are really freaked out. It impacts their business. They can't service their customers. They lose revenue. They have disruptions. They have backlogs that they have to fill. It's real problems happen. But then you have to go and tell them like, hey, we should talk about redundancy. Yeah. And how few of them actually go forward with that like redundancy plan. How do we do a better job of like helping people help themselves and like
I think it's reputation management. I think it boils down to that. Trying to convince people to enable a DR plan right after some major outage over a couple of days is asking too much. I think coaching, enabling a future where, their future jobs, their future promotions, their future, sort of compensation packages are aligned to their reputation as a leader, as an enabler of technology. I think that's the way to go about it doing it.
Okay, so, nobody gets fired for buying IBM.
No.
Right? Everybody was offline. It wasn't just us. Yeah. Like, so you say, okay, reputation management and like actual impact of your business, but you're like, well, everybody was down. Like it wasn't, like I didn't do anything wrong. Everybody was offline, You
could argue that if you had, we said it earlier, right? We were talking about multi-cloud, but let's just talk about multi-region, right? So let's assume that individual took the right contingency steps and did build regional redundancy into whatever application that they were running. that would have helped the situation. It wouldn't have been just U.S. East. It could have been, applications that fail over into U.S. West or Europe or Canada or wherever. I still feel like there's a way to enable people through the things they care about. They want to make their mama proud, right? And I feel like that's the angle.
Is this an IT problem? Is this a business problem? Or is this a communication problem?
People aren't inherently smart. They're not inherently stupid. They're just lazy, right? I think it's a business and process problem.
So what's the fix here? Just enough time or pain or external pressure before people say we shouldn't be doing this way anymore?
Mm-hmm. External pressure.
You think so?
External pressure.
I mean, this kind of goes back into that like cybersecurity thought for me, which is, we lock our doors at our houses and our cars, not because like we've been burglarized or robbed, I forget, burglarized, but because like, it's like the likelihood of it happening is high, right? Sure. So what's the ROI of having a door lock at your house? Right? You know what I mean? Like think about that for a second, right? Like, so what's the ROI on having locks in your doors? Yeah. But then you say like, okay, and I mean, I unfortunately know several people who have had, home robberies. And so like, then there becomes this like collective knowledge within the community of like, oh, you have to be really diligent about locking your doors because unfortunately these other people had, a break-in and this is what could happen if you don't, right? Or, having an alarm on or all these different things. And I'm curious your take on this because I've thought about and I've wondered is, there's like, we talk about insurance creating pressure on businesses to take security. But like how much of this is just maybe we have to have enough collective knowledge of pain of like, oh, my friend down the street, his company had ransomware and they didn't have multi-factor authentication on, which was the cause of the problem, or they got phished or something happened and it cost them $10 million and like, it was terrible. And so like, oh, should we do something instead?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, and think about the velocity and the personalization of these attacks now, right? The same AI tools that we use for productivity are the same AI tools that the bad actors are using, whether it's nation states or individuals or the combination. And I feel like we're starting to see that more. Every day there's a new data leak and there's a public awareness. It's not just on some of those databases that you and I look at on the back end that have a track record and a history of all the leakages across the internet or across the enterprise. This is like on front page news. And so I feel like there is a collective knowledge around that.
I'm going to have free credit monitoring for the rest of my life. Like at this point, if you're not paying attention to getting your free credit monitoring. I mean, the one that was really scary for me was Boston a bunch of years ago. Yeah. And they dispatched the National Guard. It was a hospital chain, hospital network. And the National Guard was there with fatigues, helping them re-image computers to get them back online. And like the imagery of like fatigue wearing National Guard in the hospitals, like putting discs in computers to like, get the computers back online because they just needed people. Like it was like a, it sits with me. We've talked about a lot of different stuff, and I think the through line here becomes when you're talking with a CIO for the first time, and they haven't had exposure to RapidScale, and they haven't gone through any sort of. It's unlikely that they don't have experience with MSPs, but let's say they haven't gone through any sort of CSP engagement, modernization. They haven't gone down these roads. What would you like them to know about before that conversation happens? Like, it's like, what is that like nugget of information that, I wouldn't say you want to convince them of or like educate them around, but like, that should be implanted in the back of their head, so when they're kind of moving around their day, it's just kind of there gnawing at them a little bit.
Yeah. Number one, I'm not trying to sell them anything, right? I'm just here as a resource. I'm here as a organization that has done the due diligence and is working with technology providers behind the scenes that have integrated into our platform. So where they get into a situation where they need help on ransomware, prevention, or MDR, or even simple things like SD-WAN. I've got a an ecosystem that I've surrounded around myself where they can come to me for help. Sometimes it's not technology; it's just, hey, I'm thinking about shifting my business in this way. RapidScale, can you help me with that? And so the collective, the industry is shifting really in real time from selling individual products to much more solution consulting, advisory-oriented services. I want the CIOs to remember that, along with the other big five and the the SIs out there, there's local, regional resources that can come to and get some advice. Punching bag. Throw some stuff on the wall and see what sticks, kind of thing. So just an opportunity to iterate, and then once we do that, we can come in with some recommendations of technology, and if it aligns, then guess what? What my dad used to say, never chase the dollar, do the right thing, help the right customer, become the right, resource, and, all that revenue and, EBITDA and all that'll all follow.
I think I'd add two things, right? Which is, you talk about like the big five. I mean, you have really deep pockets backing you, right? So like, this isn't like this idea of like people boutique-y in size and stability and all that different stuff, right? You have exceptionally deep pockets backing you.
Yeah.
And I think the bigger one is I think this misconception of it's like really expensive. It's not as expensive as people think. Like in many cases, it's not expensive at all. Like, assessments or, architecture reviews and like map programs, all these things, a lot of this stuff gets funded, by the organization they're already paying.
That's right.
And it's just like becomes like, again, heroin dealer goodie bags, right? But like knowledge is power in that situation. And if they can get knowledge for free,
why not?
Why wouldn't you do it?
Why not? And I think, speaking of, it's not that expensive. We get that misconception, especially around the area of data and AI. Man, I've got a use case. Is that going to cost me $100,000, $500,000, $3 million? I don't know. So one of the things that we did, we took averages. Will tell you certain stories based on averages. But what we did do is we call it T-shirt sizing: extra small, medium, large, extra large, scopes broken up across the four sort of phases of our AI methodology: advisory, sort of business alignment, proof of concept, delivery, implementation, and then optimization. And then literally X number of hours associated with each of those little T-shirt sizes, right? So now I can come to you and say, what? Based on our experience, we've built 100 of these, 200 of these sort of different use cases. We think that's going to be a 200-hour project at whatever our weighted hourly rate is. Here you go. And man, when you explain it that way to people, they're like, okay, that gives me I'm not going to take your word for exact dollar, but it gives me a rough order of magnitude of what this thing is going to cost me.
Yeah. Last question. What are we going to be talking about in 5 years?
God, man.
I mean, that's I gave you an intentionally what seems like not a lot of time, but in the world of tech and what's going on right now, like that's like infinity time, right? So I use 5 years really intentionally.
So let's go
2030.
back. Let's go back in time. Okay. 5 years.
5 years. I mean, so 5 years ago was COVID, 2020.
Yeah, right.
So that was work from home. There is no office. We're never coming back to the office.
Yeah.
The rush to the cloud.
Hey, I'm just going to be SaaS only. I got a Zoom. And Zoom became a verb.
Yeah.
And that was 5 years ago. So if we were sitting here in 2020, virtually probably, because we probably wouldn't have been able to do a studio.
Right.
And we went through that conversation. What would 2025 look like? Man, some of the things that we're talking about, I don't know about you. I didn't anticipate the explosion of AI and data and ChatGPT and Anthropic and all of that. I mean, maybe for those of us who closely follow, but not at all the fact that OpenAI has 1 billion users around the world on a regular basis. Never could have predicted that. And if somebody tells you that they predicted that in 2020, man, I don't believe it, right? So same thing. Now let's fast forward to 2030, 5 years from today. I feel like this agentic thing, as hyped as it is not hyped enough. I feel like there's opportunities to enable business processes with technology, with data, in all aspects of life, business, health. So I feel like if I had one prediction to make over the next 5 years, is the immersion of agents that look upon other AI agents to be able to accomplish these tasks that were historically arduous, and doing it in a much more efficient way.
So AI doomers will take your agentic conversation and be like, everybody's gonna lose their jobs. I don't believe that.
I don't believe that either.
But I want to hear your view on it.
I don't believe that. There are certain industries, there are certain jobs. I think there's an opportunity to augment, reallocate, and repurpose. We have so many use cases where we've taken, image recognition as an example. Humans used to look at images, literally PDF files or JPEGs or whatever, and have to put them in buckets. Oh, that's a electrical diagram. That's a plumbing diagram. If you're an architect, I got machines that can do that way faster and more efficiently than humans can. So can I take those resources and make them more customer facing, make them more revenue facing? Can I make them more enablement facing? That's, I think, the shift over the next 5 years, is replace some of the laborious, boring work and give that to the machine to be able to then, hand something a little bit more engaging and interesting to us, to the humans.
My view of it becomes like, it's a very pessimistic view to say that this is going to result in job losses, because that means companies are going to take efficiencies out of it and not decide to grow, but just to stay exactly the same size, replace people with AI, and just like exist there. And and my experience has always been, if you give somebody the idea that they can do 2 or 3 or 4 times the amount of what they're currently doing at the same cost structure, or maybe a little bit more of a cost structure, but you can disconnect that and widen that gap of cost versus revenue, increase your margin. It's like, that's where businesses run. And right. and like, I think about it in terms of like, there's this idea, this myth that like manufacturing in Southern California is dead, but like aerospace manufacturing in Southern California is a huge industry. And what happened was, you just had a shift from like, I wouldn't say unskilled, but like a manual lathe worker on a machine shop into a CNC operator. And the salary of that lathe operator, the machinist, into a CNC operator is probably like 5 times greater. And if you trained into the CNC role, you reap the benefits. And if you didn't, and you didn't, right? And so I kind of wonder what that's going to look like with agentic and AI, and how these things actually shift, and what's the shifting role of people. But I'm not the doomer. I'm
not a doomer either. I mean, just look at in our lives, the last 50 years, right? I remember as a kid going into a Kmart with my mom, and you had 20 registers, all manned by, good human beings doing the good job. Right?
I still prefer people over the automated machines.
I do too. You go to a Target or a Walmart, and you've got 30 aisles and one human being, kind of overseeing all of them.
There's one exception, actually. The exception to that is, the reason why I prefer people is because the amount of time it's going to take me to go through a self-checkout and scan it and bag it, I'm very inefficient, because I don't, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no skills in this, right? Yeah. But when you go to a retailer that's invested in RFID, and actually has per item RFID tagging, and you can just literally take your shopping cart and just run it through the thing, and like in one motion, the entire thing is done. That's an awesome experience.
That's right. Or you go to Amazon Go, you pick up a thing, you walk out, next thing you know, you got a thing.
That freaks me out a little bit. I get it.
No, I get the RFID thing. It's a great experience. Yeah. I don't like that experience, but my point is that there's a lot of those examples that we've continue to see in our lives. McDonald's drive-thrus manned by, AI, and they're overseeing 30 drive-thrus at one time, right?
See, that example explicitly is so funny to me, because drive-thrus, especially anybody that was operating multiple drive-thrus, fast food, they went to a centralized contact center environment, with a camera, with a person in a cubicle with a camera with a headset on, like a long time ago, because you could get more cars through the line faster. And if you're in fast food, the number one metric you track is like how many cars per hour.
That's right.
Restaurant fast casual, it's how many turns do you have per table per hour, right? Like that's your one of your primary KPIs. And so it's like this idea of like, oh, there's not a person in the window anymore taking your order. It's like that hasn't been the case for a long time.
Okay.
You just didn't know, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder, it's fascinating. I mean, I worry about again this like awareness gap of what AI is, what LLMs are, data sovereignty issues, data protection issues. We're seeing examples of you can have data leakage really easily on these platforms. How do you create like finance can see this, other people can't. Kind of rule sets and a lot of these things, and I don't know how much people are really thinking through the long tail issues here.
My long tail issues are less about the LLMs and the application layer. We're starting to see this power talk, energy consumption talk, water cooling data center talk on kitchen tables during the holidays. When your mom, my mom, who's an immigrant, asking about, hey, what's a data center? What does that mean? Like, and why is a data center use as much water? And like that conversation is percolating at that level. We're headed into. That's my doomsday.
My first data center that I had equipment in, a 2.4 kilowatt rack, because 2-post racks were the common. We weren't in four. A 2.4 kilowatt rack was a pretty dense power footprint. These facilities were built out at 50 watt per square foot for the entire floor space. Mm-hmm. So you get a little denser in terms of the actual machine space, but 2.4 kilowatt. For the bulk of my time operating data centers, like whether it was in house or, average footprint was probably 6.24 kilowatts, so dual 30 amp to 8 volt, primary ABs, or 12.5 kilowatt, right? Because you got into a socket density, a CPU socket like normalized out at about 200 watts per socket, in a footprint, and when you look at a cabinet, you're like, well, there's other things you have to deal with, like how many ports does your PDU have on it? How many ports does your top of rack switch have on it? And so like you kind of got into this like equilibrium of like this much power per rack actually made the most sense, based on all those other factors. And then we do GPU based deployments, and people are like 200 kilowatt per cabinet. And I it's like I have these moments where like I feel like the old guy in the room, where like 100 times the power in the same footprint of space in a span of 25 years.
Yeah.
And I think it'll slow down. I mean, the GPUs are going to have to become more, at some point they just have to become more efficient on a per watt basis, right? Like you're going to see a different curve.
And you're starting to see a lot of innovation into RDU-based chipsets and non-GPU driven inference only kind of things going on, right? So there's a lot of money and innovation and really smart engineers kind of thinking through that problem. I agree with you, but to me, if I had a doomsday scenario, it's that. Man, I can't turn on my faucet and get a glass of water because the water is being allocated into my ChatGPT prompt. That's a problem.
I have zero connected tech in my house. I'm sorry, I'm that guy.
Really?
I have nothing. That's not exactly true. We have Apple TV, right? Because I have my age of our kids makes the most sense, right? You can do what you need to do with it, but like my TVs aren't connected, But I also had like a design case where it was like, if I'm not home and something breaks, like, can I walk my wife through troubleshooting this thing remotely?
Yeah.
And as much as I would want to have like the most sophisticated environment possible at my house and like switch stack and everything, it's like if the instructions aren't like my, telling a second grader, go in and find this box and unplug it and plug it back in, like I failed in terms of like,
I just want to be able to, whatever stack I've got, my Bose and my LG TV, I just want to be able to say, hey, turn on the TV.
yeah, push a button.
And not even push a button, just turn on the TV to ESPN and find me the Monday Night Football game. To this day, with all this amazing technology, if you think about it, if we wrap it up, like think about all this amazing technology we've talked about in the last hour or so, and all the cloud innovation, I still can't do that, really. Sure, I can talk to Alexa and sure I can create those what if whatever what is it, the if then that, those little protocols, whatnot. I can do all that, but that's me as a nerd, not as a consumer.
There you go. There's our prediction. So in 5 years from now, in 2030, Apple will have fixed Siri, and Apple Intelligence will be an actual thing, and you'll be able to sit down in front of your TV and say, turn on ESPN.
I want to watch the morning show episode 3 at minute 34 because that's where I left off this morning, and go.
Oh, amazing.
Right?
Robby, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much fun having you in here.
Absolutely, man. Had a really good time. Can't wait to do it again. Hopefully not in 5 years.
No, much sooner.
All right. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Signed. If you got something out of this, share it with someone in your world who's staring down a tech decision. A CIO, a CFO, a founder, a procurement lead, whoever. That's how the show grows. Everything from today lives at itbroker.com/podcast. Show notes, transcript, links to anything we mentioned. If you're in the middle of a real tech decision right now and you want someone in your corner without the vendor bias, that's what we do at itbroker.com. Schedule a call on our website. Buy tech without regret. I'm Max Clark. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.